Well, thanks for that, Stephen. Another huge story is the continued VMware by Broadcom saga, and it's going to continue to be one for a long time because the moves that Broadcom is making to keep VMware dominant in the compute market continue to be received with mixed reviews. Customers are pushing back. Partners are worried about the future of a company that seems to want to push them out on one day and then wants to hold them close the next. It's created a very tense atmosphere of companies that are exploring alternatives and questioning whether or not it's time to move to the cloud full time. Let's take a look back at the roller coaster that was VMware by Broadcom. Alistair, what have you got to say about this?
This saga has been going on for years. Since 2022, when Broadcom made an unsolicited offer to buy VMware. Like the last 2 years, 2024 brought plenty of VMware by Broadcom news. Our coverage of the 2024 edition of the saga began on January 3rd, as Broadcom shut down the VMware Partner Program, and then generously allowed ex-VMware partners to apply for the Broadcom Partner Program. Now, there was a period of uncertainty between those two announcements, and also there's a requirement in the Broadcom program for a minimum of $500,000 spend with Broadcom, and they kept some of the smaller VMware partners and service providers from being admitted into the Broadcom program. The next news was that Broadcom was taking the top 200 VMware customers away from those partners and dealing directly with them. We reported on this on January 10th. And notice that any partner who had a deal underway with one of those 2,000 top customers, that deal got cancelled straight away. And that's really a problem for those partners who had invested time and effort into getting those deals going. The following week brought another piece of news, the news that Broadcom had cancelled all of the perpetual license sales for a whole swathe of VMware's products, including VMware's ESXi hypervisor. From then on, only subscription-based sales would be available. That same week, 17th of January, we also had news of Veeam adding support for Proxmox. Now, Veeam had been a partner for VMware for a very long time. Veeam's business started around VMware. So moving to support Proxmox tends to reflect, what we're going to see is, I think, a pretty consistent story here is that customers are evaluating whether VMware is still the right solution. They're looking at other possible solutions, and Proxmox was one of those possible solutions. Carbon Black, the proactive security product acquired by VMware in 2019, well, that was in for some sad news as well. Broadcom announced the end of sales for Carbon Black. We talked on February 28th about that Broadcom might probably have been trying to sell the product and had failed to find a buyer. And we were concerned that there might be some redundancies across the Carbon Black product team. It does seem that you can still buy Carbon Black products from Broadcom, so maybe there was a U-turn along the way about discontinuing those sales. That shift away from perpetual licensing came up again on April 17th. We saw that the European antitrust investigators were asking questions around the VMware licensing change. And coincidentally, Broadcom announced that perpetual licenses could still be sold to existing VMware customers if they weren't ready to move to this full-on subscription-based licensing. Be ready for more of these U-turns on other changes later. The 1st of May brought a new name to the VMware by Broadcom saga. The end-user compute business was renamed to Omnissa, as it was spun off to KKR, a leading global investment firm. Personally, I shed a small tear for all my past students from when I taught VMware Horizon View training courses. I hope Omnissa is going well, and I hope that those VMware Horizon deployments are getting the support that they need. May 15 brought a different kind of surprise. VMware Workstation Pro and Fusion Pro became free for personal use. Great news for students and hobbyists wanting to run some virtual machines on their laptops or PCs. Although, of course, there are plenty of other no-cost, no-support options for running virtual machines. A little later, VMware by Broadcom announced that Fusion and Workstation are now free for all users. Am I too cynical if this might be a precursor to VMware by Broadcom cancelling this free product? I hope Broadcom's not so cynical. The June 12th brought back another more restrictive licensing change. Broadcom announced that on-demand licensing for the VMware Cloud on AWS was going away, and that only subscription licensing would be available. Now, the on-demand licensing provided a cloud-like ability to increase and decrease VMware footprint for these customers in their VMware on AWS cloud. Customers paid only for the VMware hosts that they needed when they needed them. With only the longer-term subscription licenses available on VMware on AWS, there's less elasticity in VMware Cloud on AWS, at least from the licensing perspective, and it becomes much more like on-premises clusters that are inelastic in many ways. Now, Broadcom had always said that VMware had too many licensing options, too many stop codes, too many programs. On June 26th, we looked at a big simplification that Broadcom announced around the VMware licensing. We got two core products, VMware Cloud Foundation and VMware vSphere Foundation. VCF for large enterprise organizations and VVF for smaller enterprise organizations. The message that Broadcom cares about the biggest 2,000 VMware customers is very clear. These are the customers that like VMware Cloud Foundation. VMware Explore went ahead. That didn't change under Broadcom. And VMware announced VCF version 9 as the private cloud for everyone, or at least everyone at a large enough organization to be able to afford and to get benefits from the VMware Cloud Foundation product. We looked at a bunch of the changes that were in VMware Cloud Foundation in the rundown on August 28th. And 2024 was the first year since 2010 that I haven't attended VMware Explore. I miss seeing my friends in the VMware community, and I hope that I'll be able to see you at other events along the way, particularly Tech Field Day events. The forced move to subscription-based licensing also caused a bit of a kerfuffle with AT&T. As we reported in September 11th, AT&T had a contract that allowed them to renew just support for the VMware perpetual licenses they already had. So they had an option to continue to renew that support. Broadcom wanted them to transition to full subscription-based licensing, and naturally at a higher cost than just support, and AT&T took them to court. It seems that the two companies worked out their differences in private after the presiding judge told them to just talk to each other like some grown-ups. Along the same line, there have been a lot of stories about massive hikes in VMware licensing cost. On December 4th, we reported on a huge 1,000% increase in the VMware licensing cost at Beeks Group in the United Kingdom. Beeks Group chose not to use VMware and to migrate their 20,000 virtual machines to OpenNebula as their new private cloud platform. That's a pretty significant size of migration. That's a large customer that could have been a loyal VMware Cloud Foundation customer if they hadn't seen that 10 times increase in their licensing cost. Earlier this year, I talked to a university here in New Zealand, in fact the one I graduated from, and they chose not to take what reportedly was a 400% VMware license increase, and they replaced their relatively modest estate with Nutanix. Now, both the university still has a minimal VMware presence because there are some of the vendors that supply the university that only support their products on one hypervisor. And I suspect the same is true for Beeks because the description was that the majority of their 20,000 virtual machines had been moved to OpenNebula, not 100%. Now, do you remember I mentioned U-turns a couple of times? Well, on December 11th, we reported that Broadcom had changed its mind about taking those top 2,000 VMware customers direct. The change was that only the first 500, the largest 500 customers, were going to be direct customers that Broadcom was going to own directly. The other 1,500 of those 2,000, they could actually transact their business through a partner rather than having to work directly with Broadcom. We suggested that maybe that this was around trying to stem the tide of customers migrating away from VMware for their virtualization platforms. And I do wonder whether VMware's customers are more demanding, expect a higher level of service than Broadcom's average customers, and maybe Broadcom was trying to pass that higher demand across onto their partners. Either way, Broadcom partners will be celebrating the fact that they've got access to a whole lot of business that, well, they had before it was taken away from them. But those same partners will be wondering whether there might be another U-turn and whether that business might be taken away from them again. I think we can expect to see more of this story as we move into 2025. Will Broadcom make massive changes? Will Hock Tan get what he was looking for when he added VMware to the company?